the southeast of England, and how we can all play a part in it. So I'm hoping you'll find this quite interesting. I think the format is, hopefully this is going to be around about half an hour, and then plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So please do feel free to ask any questions, although obviously I cover one particular element of what Southern Water does. We're a big organisation. So maybe if we could move on to the first slide. Thanks, Sarah. We're doing this slightly, there you go, is that going to work? Yep, there we are. So just to first of all introduce our operating area to you. You'll be familiar probably with Southern Water because for a lot of you participating this afternoon, you'll be the water company you're familiar with. Just to give you a bit more detail on that, although we cover the majority of Hampshire, Sussex, East and West, and Kent, and the Isle of Wight, of course, it is actually a bit more complicated picture. So for a water supply, which is the areas you'll see marked in blue, we cover about just under 1 million properties and 2.5 million customers. But then we have a much larger reach, which is the area in green and blue, which is our wastewater operations. So for some people, you might be the business where we take away your wastewater, but we don't supply you with fresh water. And in other cases, we do both. So yes, so our wastewater operation is about 2 million properties served, and that's 4.6 million customers. Obviously, since privatisation, water has been divided up amongst a number of companies throughout the UK, and in the southeast it's particularly complicated because there are other operators that operate within our areas. That includes Portsmouth Water, that includes Southeast Water, Affinity Water, and a bit of Thames Water as well. So it is a bit of a complicated picture when it comes to the actual catchments and where your water comes from. I'm hoping to sort of just introduce you about what the setup is, then to talk you through a bit of some of the issues around, that we're finding in terms of supply, and then also how we're trying to meet the challenges of climate change and population in years to come. So Sarah, if we could go on to the next slide for me. So where are we now? Well, I thought I'd start on something quite optimistic. So at the moment, we are currently putting less water into supply today than we were in 1976. It's kind of one of those things that perhaps is not widely known. This basically chart shows you that we're obviously the orange line to the right is actually where we kind of are now in terms of what we're using. And a number of things have contributed to that. You'll see in the red, the areas where we've actually had to bring in hosepipe bans or restrictions over the years, and also what that does to demand, clearly. But then there's a number of things we've actually been proactively doing. And I thought we'd start with this because I think it is important to set the scene quite clearly. So leakage has come down from 235 million litres a day to 83 million litres a day. It's still too high. I'll talk a bit more about this later, but we've got big plans over this 5-year period to reduce it by another 15%. And we've actually got a big plan to reduce it by 50% by 2050. Water efficiency at the moment, what we call per capita consumption, which is the PCC you see there. So PCC is all the amount of water that we all use every day per person per day. Nationally, it's about 144 litres. I'm delighted to say across our patch in the southeast, we're currently down to 129 litres per person per day. So we've got some of the most water efficient customers in the UK at the moment. And a lot of that was driven by our universal metering programme. Most people are now on a water meter, which is the much fairer way of paying for water, because obviously you then pay for what you use. So those that use large amounts of water, you pay more for it because it's a higher bill to the customer. And universal metering was a highly successful programme. It was rolled out across our region, and we've now got 88% of our customer base on a meter, which puts us amongst the highest in the UK. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. So just to give you a kind of overall shape of the total demand for water for our region. So you can see that the biggest chunk of demand is for household demand. So that's 325 million litres per day. Non-household demand, that's sort of schools, businesses, that kind of thing, is 140 and 104 million litres per day. You'll also see the difference between the leakage, how much we're leaking from our system. So as I showed you earlier, mains leakage is particularly important. The difference here is that customer leakage does actually get put on, because it's on the customer side, we can't control it or sort it out necessarily. It is actually classified as demand. So although it's technically leakage to you and I, if your toilet's leaking, we've got a dripping tap, it is actually counted on our demand figures because it's taken as household demand. I think it's important to put this into context. If you were looking at some of the companies, for example, Northumbrian or United Utilities, they would have a higher non-household demand than we have in this part of the southeast, because they have very heavy industry, maybe very large amounts of agriculture that actually have big processing plants that use a lot of water in processes. So actually our level of non-household demand, business demand, if you like, is actually relatively low. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. But actually the scale of the challenge going forward is actually quite a big one. So during the next 20 years, we've got a nearly 20% increase in population. That's 210,000 new homes a year in our region. We've got, through climate change, roughly a 20% reduction in rainfall during the summer months, but a 20% increase in winter months, which obviously then leads to this balance that you have where climate change enables more flooding because you get large amounts of water falling in a short space of time in some times of the year, and then other times of the year you get long periods of dry weather. A lot of people think we live in a wet country, and yes, we do in certain elements, but if you actually think of the number of days you actually have to walk out the house with an umbrella, it is actually relatively low. We get lots of dull days, but the actual days where you get large amounts of persistent, steady rain is actually quite a short number. And actually, this is all contributing to our challenge going forward. If you then add in the fact, and I'll talk a bit more about this later, that we're actually having to reduce the amount of water we're taking from very, very important chalk streams. And being, I'm a massive supporter of the living coast and the biosphere and what has been achieved. And actually, we would all be in the zone of wanting to protect those habitats that are so critical for wildlife. Really, chalk streams are probably our rainforests from around the world, because 85% of chalk streams that are probably one of the best habitats for wildlife are found in the UK. And so as habitats, we need to protect them. And over abstraction for water consumption is actually damaging these habitats in summer months, particularly the summer months. And so we've made commitments with government to reduce the amount of water we're taking from rivers. So all of this is feeding into a perfect storm of change and pressure that is actually meaning that we are now predicting water shortages within the next 10 years without action on the ground. And that's why we've launched our Target 100 water efficiency initiative to work with communities, businesses, households, and the wider public in actually helping to raise the issue and actually cut future demand, because it's a much more cost-effective and environmentally friendly thing to do to reduce the amount of water we use in the first place. So if we can move on to the next one, please, Sarah. So one of the things that we did was we commissioned a report from the Green Alliance, which is a think tank on the water efficiency side, on the green policy side. And the Green Alliance looked at the whole situation of where water is going in this country in terms of a key resource. Remember, we can't live without water for very long. It's a fundamental resource that we totally undervalue. And I think it's something we all need to send out that message if it's one message from today, it's that the value of water is way beyond the actual cost of it. It is absolutely critical to every part of society. You think how long we, communities survive if schools have to shut. Your kids get sent home from school, the economic disruption it causes. That's just one aspect of water. If we don't have water, you can't have life, and that's the key message from today. And the Green Alliance did a piece of work looking at what might happen to water bills in future years. And there is a real danger that because of the harder edged, the bigger schemes that we're going to have to bring on, that actually the demand on the water bill payer is actually going to become higher to actually meet some of these massive challenges. So if you remember, I said that the most cost effective thing we can do is cut leakage where we can, do it economically viably, and I'll again talk about that if you want a discussion around it, because the problem with leakage is you could dig up every road and fix every leak, but the economic disruption from that would be huge. So it's about having a model that enables you to fix leaks when you can, as quickly as possible, but as economically viably as possible. But also demand, cutting demand is a very cheap thing to do if you can work with customers to understand it and for them to change their habits. And that's why, but without this kind of thing, we think that the bills could rise. And what they actually concluded is simple water efficiency. This is just cutting out those areas of wastage in your life. Can save you about 78 quid a year on your water and energy bills. Now, okay, that probably there are bigger things you could do. Lagging your loft or changing your energy supply are probably going to give you bigger savings. But actually 78 quid a year to reduce your energy and water bills, it's a good message. And I think we need to be making sure that we share that to ensure people understand it. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. So what I thought I'd talk a bit about is, having said that we've got our per capita consumption down to the sort of one of the lowest areas of the country, this year has obviously thrown massive challenges up to us. So this graph shows you the orange and the blue are the kind of average temperatures through a year season, if you like, throughout the year, the highs and the lows of temperature. And you'll see that so the average temperature is then mapped as the wiggly line that's between the blue and the orange colours at the bottom. And what you see above that is a black line that's wiggling around. Now, that is standard average distribution input, as we call it, the amount of water we're putting into supply. So the main thing to get from this graph is that during the summer months, when you get hotter weather, demand goes up. So we all know that. When we get hotter weather, then people start filling their paddling pools, they're watering their garden more frequently. They're down, they've got lots of outside usage, they're washing their cars. This is all adding to what we call discretionary use during the summer months. Well, the big blue line that you can see at the highest point now is demand for 2020 so far. So what we're finding is the combination of most people working from home is obviously shifting demand from business usage to household usage. So you would expect that. But it also coincided with a really, really hot summer at various points of time. And so we actually find that demand this year has gone up by about 20%. Well, clearly, if COVID carries on for several years without adequate safeguards, then household usage is going to carry on being really high. And if we get bouts of hot weather combined with that, then usage is going to carry on going up. So you can see that not only have we got the challenges that I outlined earlier about all the existing challenges we've got, but actually COVID could be putting an extra burden onto our operations, if you like, to actually provide that water. And at some points our reservoirs, our public supply reservoirs, have not been able to treat water fast enough to get it into supply. So hence you get low pressure periods. So sometimes you'll see us saying to customers, please help us by, filling half your paddling pool, not the whole pool, because that will help us with the amount of water we're putting into supply. And these are genuine issues that we have with the network. It's just something that we have to deal with, but it also relates to water usage going forward. It's a bit like in hot weather, energy demand goes up because you're putting extra people trying to cool their houses, as well as all the extra usage that you get. So again, hotter summers through climate change are going to lead to increases in demand for reasons we've just been through. So Sarah, if we move on to the next one, please. So I put this slide in because, I was talking about the value of water before, and water is an absolutely critical resource that, again, we overlook, but it is interchangeable with other pressures that we have. Food, energy, water are the sort of key nexus, if you like, of life, and we have to kind of get this balance right. And from a sustainability point of view, it's trying to come up with a kind of way of looking at these things holistically. So I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, but we've got desalination as an option to look at for turning seawater into drinking water that we're now seriously considering for our region. Well, the danger of desalination is it is a much more energy intensive process, because you have to put much more energy into the process of getting salt out of the water to get it into drinking water quality. But at the same time, we know about, for example, the impact of farming on the landscape. So if you actually have more wildlife, more wild spaces in landscapes, then that's also good for water quality. It also prevents flooding. And so this kind of nexus is really, really important to kind of get your head round. And although maybe a lot more of the focus has been on energy in the years, and we know how good our record is of transforming the economy now to be on renewables, for example, and that's really, really good news. But if we were to carry on going down the, say, hydrogen road, then we're going to need more water use for hydrogen. If fracking gets going, there's more water use in fracking. So these things all have an impact, and you can't ignore the relationship between these different sectors. And I just wanted to make that point today, that it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because if you get this right, you can have multiple benefits for different areas of the economy. So we move on to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to now focus on the Hampshire region, which is where we have our most acute challenges in the short term. I just thought I'd take you through this. I did promise this was around the southeast. I will come back for those greater Brighton and viewers, if you like. I'll come back to some more local examples of within the patch, but I just wanted to take you to Hampshire, to the western part of our region. So at the moment, the majority of water in Hampshire is supplied by two really, really important chalk streams, the River Test and the River Itchen. If you haven't visited either, I would really strongly recommend you go and take a walk along them. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're, pristine rivers, full of life, and make for fantastic recreation. So we've made recent changes to our abstraction licenses to reduce the amount of water we're taking from these two rivers, which is leaving us with a shortfall of 190 million litres a day in a 1 in 200 year drought. We're already seeing with climate change that the periods of time where you get a 1 in 200 year drought are actually coming forward. So this is becoming quite tricky for us, because as a supplier of water, we have to supply customers with water. You can't cut customers off. So that's why chalk streams will become over abstracted if in dry and sunny and strong summer weather, very warm temperatures, flow rates will drop in the rivers, and that's what we're trying to protect against. So we're really keen, and we're keen to work with the regulators to do this. But these chalk streams support a wide variety of species, and the protection we supply 700,000 people from them. So it's a really, really important thing. So, we're working with the regulators to do this, but it actually means that we have to implement permanent replacement water supply solution by 2027. And 2027 is obviously only 7 years away. So it is massively on our agenda at the moment. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So we're currently looking at a kind of new Western water grid, if you like. And that includes a desalination plant for Southampton, that desalination plant would be big enough to supply 75 million litres per day. We're looking at new, what we call bulk supplies, which is taking supplies from our neighbouring water companies. We're looking at water recycling. This is where we treat water at our wastewater treatment plants to high quality. And then instead of immediately discharging it back into the environment, we discharge it into a river, and then we abstract from that river downstream of it and put it back into supply, having gone through the treatment process again. So we're kind of taking that water and putting it back round the system before it gets discharged into the environment. You know, the quality of the water coming out of wastewater treatment plants is very high quality because of the European wastewater directives and things. But it means that we can reuse that water again, which means that it's a much more efficient way of using it. Because obviously, if you treat it to high quality and then you pump it out to a river or the sea, you're losing that water for supply. And, you know, there seems like a bit of an odd relationship with that. So if we can improve that, and that's what they do in Singapore, that's what they do in other nations. You know, there's lots of examples of water recycling going on. And in fact, they say, you know, in London, you're drinking the water sort of 7 times, if you like, that go through people. That's the way the water process works. So it's actually just making that a much tighter process and actually making it a quicker process. And then finally, we're actually working with Portsmouth Water they're building a new reservoir which will supply Southern Water customers. So this is about working together in partnership with our neighbouring water companies to come up with a solution. So if we just move on to the next slide, this kind of shows you the how we've kind of divvied up the holistic challenge that we've got and how we're going to divvy up these solutions. So you'll see desalination and recycling is giving us about 39% of what we need in 2027. Havant Thicket is the reservoir I talked about. Bulk supplies are giving us something. Then you've got T100. This is what we're trying to achieve with water efficiency, leakage reduction, and then how, you know, the Sandown water recycling on the Isle of Wight, and also the catchment and demand management for catchment. So this is about working with farmers to manage water in a different way. It's important to say that about half of the water that the Isle of Wight is using is currently shipped from the mainland underneath the Solent. A lot of people don't know that. So again, the Isle of Wight isn't self-sufficient in water either. So again, those have an impact on those chalk streams. So that's the situation in Hampshire. I think it kind of shows you the kind of challenges we've got moving forward as a clear example and how we're trying to tackle it. In Brighton, the chalk block is actually a lot more resilient. You can imagine the aquifer that sits under the South Downs is like a massive sponge, and that absorbs the water. And you know, we do have challenges with levels in aquifers, but generally that aquifer at the moment is responding very well to what we need it to do. But actually, because it's an aquifer, most people don't ever see where the water comes from. And so it leads to this lack of understanding of why water is important. So if we move on to the next slide. So obviously I'm going to talk a bit about water efficiency today because it's the key programs that I manage. And we've been learning some key lessons from our program. One thing that is quite clear is one size doesn't fit all with customers. You know, we offer the home water saving program to customers because we know that every house setup, family, attitude towards water is different, and we want to get alongside each and every one of you to actually talk about why water is important, how you use it in your home, and then give you the free products to cut demand in homes and reduce that wastage. So we're not saying have a rubbish shower, we're just saying some showers are now using more than bars because they're 15 litres per minute in power. Well, that level of water usage is not needed to have a good shower. Most showers are sort of in the range of 7 to 9 litres per minute, and that's high enough to give you a good shower. So let's cap that usage, let's cut it down, let's fix those leaking toilets. There was a programme on leaking toilets. I've been involved with the sort of the group that have been working on these sort of issues, and we're now fixing leaking toilets for free. But actually there is a huge problem with different with types of toilets, particularly the dual flush, that do leak after a number of years, and we're trying to work with the manufacturers to repair this. The next lesson we've learned is that incentives can really help change behaviour. You know, having a conversation with a customer is fine, but what about actually giving them a nudge or a reward to actually say well done and keep going on the journey? Targeted water efficiency can play a major role in deferring asset investment. If we can work to cut consumption, and that can push back some of these more expensive types of investments, that's good for customers' bills. And so that's good for customers, it's good for the environment, you know, and it's good for wildlife. And that's something that we want to try and get across. And then moving on to the next point, customers need more of a relationship with their usage to engage with water efficiency. So customers really have to understand what their water they're using and get that information quite easily. And then you need to give them the wherefore to actually do something about it, with giving them hints, tips, actually programs that offer them things to enable them to actually do something about it. And again, that's what we try and do with our water efficiency team at Southern Water. And then finally, linking affordability and water efficiency helps the most vulnerable in society. So some customers that are struggling to pay their bills are also using large amounts of water. So actually cutting that consumption for them will protect them from future bill shocks. And that's something we've been doing effectively with Brighton Hove City Council, where we actually offered social housing customers across the city the opportunity to have a free affordability check at the same time as a home visit, which enabled us to really help those that are struggling to pay. And it's a great example of where the council and Southern Water have worked together with the housing team, actually talking to their residents to actually encourage them to be part of this. So actually, again, there's so many links here to water efficiency. So if we move on to the next slide, a bit complicated this one, but I just thought I'd give you a flavour of how important behaviour change is to us and how you influence change in society. And you'll see there's no magic bullet to this. It's a whole combination of different things. It's, you know, it's price signals, it's collaboration and partnership, it's giving those incentives, it's, you know, having a clear policy regulation way forward. And we've got really good examples now where we're working with government to try and influence. So one of the things I talk about all the time is bringing in a water label for a water using products, because we think it's the kind of nudge that will give consumers the understanding that a product is a high using product, and that actually by choosing a lower using product, you'll actually be saving you'll save some money on your energy and water bills and actually contributing to the solution, not the problem. So these sort of things are a combination of things, and it's, you know, change in society is often quite slow, and you know, Sarah's doing fantastic work through the Biosphere, and we are working through a number of other initiatives to try and get residents and communities to actually understand their part in the world and their ecosystems, and how we can all play a part in reducing that harm, and actually water efficiency is a key part of that. So if we move on to the next slide. So I talked about the kind of the impacts on society. This is a graph plotting all of the biggest impacts that water companies can have on, or all the biggest initiatives you could actually run to cut household consumption. And it shows that the two biggest are out of water company control. So and I talked about water labelling before, water labelling and metering are the two biggest things we could do as a society to cut consumption. Because when you're on assessed charges, i.e. you pay depending on the rateable value of your home, then if you're not paying for the water you're using, you're just paying for the size of the property you've got, then actually some people will leave a hose pipe on all night to water their garden and not worry about it. As soon as you switch them to a water meter, they're much more conscious of their usage. So actually we've found that reduction in usage has been driven by the metering program. And actually water labelling is an even more important thing to actually change society, because we think if you buy any product, from a hose pipe to a pressure washer to a washing machine to a shower head, and it comes with an efficiency rating, okay, not everyone will, but a large number of people will pay attention to that and actually shift their habits. And we found that with the energy label quite effectively, and the energy label has led to the banning of the incandescent light bulb, and then the whole innovation around LED lighting and these sort of initiatives, which has really changed society. So if we just move on to the next slide then. So our Target 100 program has 4 key pillars to it. It's metering, but actually smarter metering. It's actually giving more regular updates to households about their usage. So rather than waiting for the bill to come in, some customers don't look at their bill. Can we give you more frequent nudges about your usage? Having given you that information, can we then, through customer contact, get you to understand the importance of water efficiency and how you can do something about it? But having given that advice, can we then give you a home visit, which is about a tool to actually do something for you and your family? But then what about the ongoing nature of this? Is there a nudge and an incentive we can give you on a more regular basis to keep you on the water efficiency journey? And that's the kind of how the 4 pillars of Target 100 work together to actually deliver a joined up water efficiency strategy. So I'm just going to talk, if we move on to the next slide, just quickly about this is water efficient new development. Now, new development is really, really important. I talked about the growth happening in the Greater Brighton area and the southeast. Yeah, but the issue around climate change is that 80% of the homes that are going to be in existence in 2050 have already been built. So we have to go down the retrofit road. We have to help consumers with the existing housing stock. But that doesn't mean we can't show exemplars in the new housing. And this is what we're trying to do. We've got about at least four developments in the southeast where we're talking to developers about using what we call it's called final effluent reuse. It's water reuse directly in those homes to flush toilets. So, and what I'm showing here is a visit I made to the Northwest Cambridge development, which Cambridge Water have adopted. This is using, and you'll see in the middle of the pictures, you'll see like what looks like a rainwater collection scheme or a SUD scheme for the development, where water is channeled through a series of different runoff ditches into a big pond. That water then is taken through a treatment plant and actually goes into flushing toilets separately. Now, the problem with rainwater harvesting to do this is that in long periods of dry weather in the summer months, and particularly climate change, you're not going to have the water to play with. But what about those wastewater treatment plants that are treating water to high quality and then pumping out into the environment? Couldn't we repump that back into homes to flush toilets and take away about 30% of the water use that's coming from potable supply? So instead of having to have all these challenges on the network, you could then have recycled water flushing toilets because you're not drinking that water, so it doesn't have to be the same quality as what's coming out of the taps. And that's what's happening in we're looking at for developments. The nearest to Brighton would be the Northern Arc, up to Horsham and Crawley, where Homes England are very interested in this for their development. Next slide, please. Behaviour change campaigns are really important. I realise I've just spelt behaviour wrong on that slide, so sorry about that. This is showing what we did with the Brighton and Hove buses. I see, Martin, you're on today. Good to see that we were able to do some sponsorship of getting both the Living Coast and the Southern Water message across about home visits on the Brighton Hove bus network, which happened I think about 2 years ago now. But it was a good example of actually getting that high profile message out to customers. The next slide, please. This is a partnership we did with the South Downs National Park, where we actually retrofitted 3 businesses, 2 pubs and a hairdresser's with both water and energy efficiency. And you'll see that we made savings on both, but actually the energy savings through LED lighting were far higher than the water efficiency savings. So again, this is the challenge we've got, is water is quite a cheap commodity to the majority of people, and so you don't get the huge financial paybacks that you do in the energy sector. So it's about how do we change that narrative and get it changed for customers. Moving on to the next slide. This is just to show you that in Hampshire, we've tested the idea of a community incentive. This is the idea of working with 6 villages to the east of Winchester, where they get their direct water for their local supply from the rivers that I talked about. And we work with them to kind of try and cut demand. And we did it by saying, look, if you help us cut demand, we will provide back to your communities money to be used on projects that you can nominate in your community. It's basically saying, because that will make savings on our future investments, we can share some of those savings with you. And it was really popular. And I'm pleased to say that we managed to save about 8% on demand compared to the neighbouring areas through this project. So again, we are looking at how we can incentivise customers going forward. Can we give personal family rewards, membership of sports clubs, theatre tickets, electric car club membership, or something like that, to actually spur households on to really get the business around, water efficiency is something we want to be part of, and we're going to be rewarded for doing it. I've mentioned, if we move on to the next slide, I'm mentioning labelling. There's been a voluntary label which Southern Water and I've been involved with over the last 10 years or so to set up. The voluntary label hasn't worked. It's been adopted by a number of brands, but they haven't been labelling a lot of their products, particularly the high-end ones. And we're now calling very clearly on government to introduce a universal mandatory water label. And we'd like anyone that's listening to this that has any influence on government to tell them that message as well. It's starting to get through. We've got the Committee on Climate Change, the National Infrastructure Commission, Blueprint for Water, WaterWise. All the water companies are all calling on government to do this. We think it's the single most cost-effective thing for demand in the UK that could be done, particularly post-Brexit. If we move on to the next slide, I've talked about partnerships being absolutely critical. And here's the example of some of the partners we're working with. It's been brilliant to work with the Living Coast on a number of things, and I'll outline a few of those in a second. But partnerships are where it's at, because water companies on their own cannot influence demand on its own. We are probably not always the best amplifiers of the message, because people say, well, why does a water company want to sell me less water? I've tried to outline some of the benefits, and we want others to be amplifying those with us as well. If we move on to the next slide, I'm now going to take you through the 5 projects that we've been working with the Greater Brighton Economic Board in partnership with the Living Coast. And we've come up with 5 key water-related programmes that we are now looking to deliver. I talked about water recycling in the Northern Arc, so I've already mentioned that. That's a great opportunity in that new housing development. So if we move on to the next slide, this is around kelp, the kelp forest off the Sussex coast. Again, this is a massive carbon. This could be a massive carbon sink, actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere and re-establishing this really important biodiversity resource off the coast, which has been, let's say, depleted over the years. And kelp plays its part alongside trees being planted and salt marshes in actually sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it up, which is really, really good for biodiversity. Thirdly, we've got the next one, please, is rewilding. This is around how can we work on habitats to actually enable these to absorb water, stop runoff, reduce urban flooding. These are all important things that, again, fit into the wider water cycle and how a more natural world would actually be reverse this massive plunge in biodiversity and species, but it would actually do lots of benefits for human beings as well. And that's something that we really have to get that message across to people. The next slide is around efficient homes. So I've talked about our home visit programme. With the Greater Brighton Economic Board, we're looking at trying to see whether we could actually add in LED lighting installation into this as well. So when we're in a home and we see inefficient incandescent light bulbs, we say to the homeowner, look, should we just quickly swap those bulbs over for you and give you some more energy efficient lighting for your house? We need sponsorship for that because we can't fund those from the water bills. But we've got meetings with Brighton Council, for example, to talk about whether we can trial that in Brighton as an initiative going forward. And then finally, I talked about lobbying, how important that is. It's about trying to, amplify some of the key things we want to see in our region. There's lots of really interesting things going on, whether it's hydrogen and Brighton Hove buses, for example, or other initiatives that we're trying to drive forward. But it's about increasing the lobby of nationally to say, look, in this region, we've got some unique ecosystems and some unique solutions we want funding for, your partnership to support. And that's about government changing things as well with developers and with planners. So that's another voice we can have. So if we can move on to, I think it's the final slide. So I just thought I've taken you through some of the challenges and some of the ways that we're trying to work together. But I thought I'd leave you with these benefits of water efficiency. If you can actually deliver water efficiency, then actually some of these issues, which are going to be massive in the years to come, will have a lower impact and will enable us to deliver much more cost effectively for customers. And that's really, really important, because all these investments, you know, they have an impact on bills ultimately, and we don't want water bills to go up. We want them to stay low, but we also want to get the infrastructure improvements made to actually deliver the infrastructure that's fit for a climate changed world. And that's what it's all about. So thank you very much. One more final slide to go if you want to contact me separately following the talk. But at that point, Sarah, I'll hand over to you once again.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was a really interesting talk. Ben's been very generous with his time, and he's offered to answer some questions after this. If you want to use the chat function to submit your question, that'd be really helpful. For those of you that aren't familiar with Teams, the chat function is the little speech bubble in the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to kick off, Ben, if you don't mind, just to get the ball rolling. I was really interested to see that the predictions for a climate changed world show that we're due to have 20% less rainfall in the summer, yet 20% more in the winter. What can we as householders do to help sort of mitigate that change of water flow and help use some of the water that we have falling from the sky in our own personal use?
That's a great question. And I think, so the first thing I would say is if you haven't got a water butt on one of your downpipes, then get a water butt. Yeah, they're not the solution to everything, because they, you know, in long dry periods, they'll run dry. But at least you can rather than always think, right, I'm going to water my garden with the tap and the hose, you can go to the water butt first. And if you've got water in it, use it. And then particularly ahead of large deluges of water, you can empty the butt and actually have that available to absorb some of that impact of that rainfall. But also you can change your practices, you know, plant a rain garden in your garden, if you like, make it more permeable. Try not to have the hard surfaces that lead to runoff that go straight into the street. That's particularly important for places like Brighton, which are very hilly, because with large urban surfaces, rainfall just falls on those hard asphalt surfaces and then just flows straight into our gutters, into the gutters and into the sewers. That then goes straight into our network. Large amounts of rainfall then leads to problems where it backs up in our system. And instead of actually flooding people's bathrooms with sewage because the system backs up, yeah, we then have to do emergency discharges, which is not what we want to do into the environment. So we can all play our part in trying to reduce the amount of water that's flowing into the sewer network, because that will help reduce these instances. So, you know, if you've got the opportunity to make sure you're planting things that likes water. I mean, clearly the drought situation in summers might mean you have to look at drought tolerant plants as well, but making sure that you've got ability for absorption of rainfall is actually really important on your garden.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to follow that up and ask, is there a great resource that you can point people to for sort of tips, other things that they can be doing around the home?
So the key tips in the home are to the key things. The key things in the home. Sorry, my little ones arrived in the back there. The key tips in the home I would start with is to do a little test on your shower. So what you can do is you can actually get a bag of water and then time 30 seconds flow. You can actually time the shower, fill that bag of water up. The 30 seconds flow, then measure how much is in there and then double it, and that will give you your flow rate per minute of the shower. And as I say, if you're pumping out something like 15 litres per minute, then that is way in excess of what you need in terms of a shower. So that's a little tip you can do. There's other things you can do, like if you've got one of those things that happens, say you've got water that you turn on the tap to start getting water out the tap, but you want to check it's cold enough to drink. Well, you can actually run that tap into a jug and put that jug in the fridge, so you're not losing that water, and then it will be cool next time you go to drink that water. So there's little things you can do like this. Get the water butt, have a home visit. That's very easy to do. Obviously, turn off the tap when you're brushing your teeth. That's a classic favourite, if you like. But no, all of these things together are really important. Get some mulch for your garden. Putting that bark on your garden will lead to less rain evaporation, so you'll need to water your garden less often. Those sort of things are really, really important. There's more water saving tips on the Southern Water website, so do go and have a look at it.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I think everyone's being shy with their questions, so I might say we'll leave it there. But I just want to say thanks again, Ben. Really appreciate your time and hope everyone found this interesting. It's going to be the first in a series of talks that we hope to do across our partnership as a Biosphere, just to share this knowledge that we have more widely with our audience. So please join us for future talks. They'll all be advertised on our website. Thanks very much and take care.